Postal workers are worried about their jobs as well. President Trump says he might place the U.S. Postal Service under the control of the Commerce Department, taking over an agency that has operated independently for decades now. So this afternoon, postal workers and their allies held a rally outside union headquarters in Northwest D.C. They said no to what they see as the dismantling of an institution.
So let's be very clear about what this is. A direct attack on the 640,000 dedicated people that work at the Postal Service, on the service that we provide, and on the hundreds of millions of Americans that rely on the service we provide every single day.
The Postal Service has been losing money for years now while competing with other delivery companies. But here's what's different for them. By law, it's required to deliver to all areas, including those that are not profitable.
We've got ones that can see. Welcome, everybody, to today's show. Donald Trump is also looking to shake up the U.S. Postal Service, which should not surprise anybody. If we're heading towards AI governance, it means that everything is done digitally. And why is this important? Well, this is important for a few reasons. This is important because if you think about how people like us communicate and how people in the future are going to be forced to communicate, you start to realize that all communications are going to have to be done digitally. And of course, if all communications are done digitally, that means that the government can have full surveillance over everything that you say to every single person. And that's really what this is all about. Now, this isn't going to happen overnight. The USPS, the Postal Service, is not going to disappear tomorrow. It is not going to disappear next week. But you're going to see, like you see with everything else, a slow but steady transition. It could start with the removal of certain days where you will not receive mail anymore. And sure, people might yell and scream at first. You'll hear protests of postal workers who have lost their jobs, and no one will care because nobody has seemed to care about how people make a living in this country over the last couple of years, right? We've seen people who are okay with people losing their jobs over not being willing to poison themselves. So, of course, when people see the post office employees yelling and screaming about losing their jobs, most people just shake it off and say, well, I got to worry about my own. Well, here's the problem. All these jobs, all of our jobs are going to become obsolete, and they're not hiding that with replacing us with artificial intelligence. So, of course, at first, people are going to hear this, and they're going to go, whoa, what? Trump's going to take over and privatize the U.S. Postal Service? And we need to figure out exactly what that means, and I'll explain it to you in this video. But you need to wrap your head around what the future looks like. And yes, there will still be deliveries, but there will be drone deliveries, and packages will be delivered. But mail will become obsolete, as it already almost is, right? Think about how you used to get bills in the mail and you would write checks. But guess what? Without mail, checks become more and more obsolete, forcing you into digital currency, forcing you into digital communications. Take 1 day, take 2 days, now take 3 days. All of a sudden, you aren't getting mail delivered Monday through Saturday. And don't forget, when they privatize this, it means that they could cut off certain areas from receiving actual mail. So in other words, they could see to it that if you live out, let's say in the middle of the woods, like Ted Kaczynski, for example, you aren't going to be getting letters in the mail. The government's going to say, no. You need to live within this certain boundary if you're going to actually get mail from the U.S. Postal Service, especially anything that might be handwritten or delivered. Let's say perhaps in a smart city type of area, an area where the government has full control over all of the people. And it really looks in the future like Ready Player One. That's what the world looks like. People living in storage containers. The only things that they get delivered to them will be food and water. Of course, it won't be food that you actually want to eat. It'll likely be plant-based food. And maybe you have some other packages you're allowed to order to entertain yourself while you're enslaved, because it's the least the government can do, right? To send you the latest Sonic the Hedgehog game while they have you locked up and quarantined inside of these shipping containers. So we've been hearing about this for years now. Even Forbes back in 2019, Trump talked about it in 2019. Why do we still have mail? And how much longer do we even need it? You can even ask Google AI, which I like to show people in my videos what the Google AI says, because this is what the sheeple go to for answers. So if anybody out there said, hey, are we going to lose the post office with what Trump's doing? Well, they're telling you. it's becoming increasingly likely that the traditional letter-based post office will become largely obsolete due to the rise of digital communication. And this has nothing to do with how much money the U.S. Postal Service loses. This is how they convince people to be on board with. This is how MAGA gets convinced that we need to get rid of the post office because it's all about making money. It's all about business. Trump's a businessman, right? This has to do with controlling communications. So when you think to yourself about how you expect to communicate in the future, if people like us decided we weren't going to go along with this digital world order, we weren't going to get a digital ID, we weren't going to go forward with digital currency, we were going to try to live away from that. Well, guess what? You weren't going to be able to do anything through the mail anymore because you weren't going to be able to communicate. And say you picked a state and you picked X amount of acres in that state for people like us to go to. Now, that would never really happen because if any of us got together and went to a large area, even if we went there with no weapons and we went to live just peacefully like the Amish live, and we went there and we just wanted to forage and we wanted to hunt and we wanted to live in peace with one another, well, it would air on the news that we were all out there planning an attack on America, and everybody out there would call for our heads, and that's exactly what would occur because the government would never allow it to happen. But hypothetically, let's say you currently do live off grid. Let's say you do communicate via mail. Let's say you talk about quote unquote crazy conspiracies, right? Well, once they privatize this, you won't be able to get mail in certain regions because the government will decide who can and who cannot receive mail. That's what people need to understand. President Trump says he's looking to change the Postal Service, including giving the Secretary of Commerce authority over what has been an independent organization for over 50 years. It's a move that could be the first step towards privatization that could upend how Americans get critical deliveries, including online purchases, prescription drugs, checks, and vote-by-mail ballots. It's important they put the vote-by-mail ballot in there because that's all that the conservative MAGA people need to hear to think that this isn't some new world order agenda to get everything digital. They just immediately think, well, that wasn't fair what they did with those mail-in ballots, that entire psyop that the government fed everybody for 8 years, hearing about ballot boxes blowing up and fake dead people voting, all that stuff was done by design so they could just continually slip stuff like that into all of these articles about vote-by-mail ballots to make people say, hey, you know what? Let's get rid of it then. Let's get rid of the mailing. We don't need the USPS. That's how they corrupted the election the last time, right? So the Washington Post first reported last week, citing numerous anonymous sources, that Trump planned to disband the U.S. Postal Service's Board of Governors and place the agency under direct control of the Commerce Department and Secretary Howard Lutnick. How convenient, another bagel lover. The Wall Street Journal also reported on the plan to dissolve the commission, citing government officials. Other countries have privatized their postal services in the past, but a plan to privatize the 250-year-old service that predates the formation of the United States could dramatically change the way Americans receive deliveries and even who would be able to get service. Current law requires the USPS to deliver to all addresses, even rural ones that are too costly for a private business to serve profitably. Even many online purchases handled by private companies such as United Parcel Service depend upon the Postal Service to handle the last mile of delivery to homes. So you hear right there, making this about money, right? In addition to the the mail-in ballots. These are mind control tactics used to get people to think that Donald Trump's not serving the deep state. He's getting rid of the Postal Service. Well, they screwed him over with the mail-in ballots. Plus, everything they're doing is about saving money, right? That's why you've heard more and more stories about Doge over the last couple of weeks, where Donald Trump has openly said, hey, we're going to send checks to the American people. We're going to give them money back for taxes that they've put in. So all people hear is that because they're money-driven and money-hungry, and they cheer for it without realizing that this is part of sabotaging the infrastructure by taking it all down and then having everything digital and fully controlled through artificial intelligence. So they say, well, we want to have a post office that works well and doesn't lose massive amounts of money. And we're thinking about doing that. And it will be a form of a merger, he said when asked if he wanted to make the USPS as part of the Commerce Department. It'll remain the Postal Service, and I think it'll operate a lot better than it has over the last couple of years, right? So a shift in business, billions in losses. Now the propaganda wants to, and this is how it's being reported in the media, so this is how they're conditioning people, okay? The service has been losing money for years. The volume of first-class mail has been declining for years as people found other ways, including emails, texts, and other electronic communications, replacing letters and online payments, replacing the sending of checks to pay bills. But the growth of online shopping has resulted in a significant increase in paper volumes. So then they go on to talk about how, well, they're still going to need to deliver somehow, right? Well, we know obviously there's FedEx, there's going to be Amazon drones, there's UPS. Those are all out there ready to go. They've been doing drone deliveries for a while, but they've been conditioning people even longer into accepting that, even accepting drone delivery for Uber Eats and food services, right? So when you look at the key takeaways of what this would mean, the U.S. Postal Service loses billions of dollars annually, which has prompted calls from Trump to privatize the organization. Privatization could result in higher costs, slower deliveries, and reduced services, particularly in rural areas where affordable options are already limited. So it's another nice way to cram us into smart cities and areas where, well, you only receive mail if you're living in a certain area. Now, doesn't mean now that they're not going to go through your letters that you actually send, and they don't expect you to actually live in a smart city and send handwritten mail to one another, but you can bet your bottom dollar they'll be scanning those letters that go through the actual handwritten mail process to see what's in those letters, especially if it comes from someone like me or you. But the key thing to take away from there is, one, slower deliveries, right? So sending things through the mail could take weeks. Well, it'll take weeks. Why? Because there's going to be less days of actual delivery. And at first you're going to yell and scream. And eventually you're going to switch over, or you're going to do something differently that you might receive through the mail. Physically, you'll start getting electronically, because this is another way for them to get you to shift. Now, if it's a package from Amazon, well, you'll go to Amazon and you'll demand that Amazon deliver it to you faster, and say your Prime membership says it's supposed to be there in 2 days. And Amazon will answer you and say, we're on it. We got you covered. And they'll deliver it in 2 days. And then suddenly you'll forget about what is now being called snail mail. And you won't think once about communications, because currently you feel like you're free when you send out emails to your friends or your coworkers that the government and the NSA aren't looking at them. But once everything is in place with AI governance infrastructure, then all of a sudden you'll beg for snail mail to return. You'll say, why did we ever get rid of the U.S. Postal Service? Why did we ever get rid of mail? Why is everything electronic? Because everything being electronic gives them full control of everything. And that's the problem. It's coming at your convenience. They're getting you to think that this is about what's faster, what's quicker, what's funner. They've conditioned you into doing this for about 20 years almost now. And now everybody does it. And people laugh at snail mail, right? But it wasn't about continuing to get snail mail because you don't know how to use technology. That's what they want people out there to think. Oh, these people that haven't transitioned to tech, they're stupid, they don't get it. It was always about giving government control. And all of these people have willingly given up control. And it has everything to do with communications. I can't emphasize that enough. So the USPS operates under a universal service obligation, which means it must serve every address, again, in the country at consistent rates, even in remote areas. So this is the narrative they're going to use to tell you that the USPS suddenly, after 250 years, is suddenly going broke, right? And of course, it gives them another excuse to jack up the prices, so they make it so that you literally can't send mail. Suddenly, your postal stamp, just to send a letter, will be $10.50 to probably send, just to make sure you don't even try to do it. But once they could start removing the rural areas, again, this is another mechanism of control and force being used, all in the name of convenience and money, right? Trump's a businessman. It's all about saving money, right? And then they tell you, well, there's a decrease in usage. The calls for overhauling the USPS have been, they're not unfounded due to the advent of digital communications and online banking and bill payments. Traditional mail has become obsolete, and that's all been done by design with the consent of most people, because they monitored and watched how easily they were able to get people to bank online, how easily they were able to get people to use Gmail instead of physical mail. And because all of these things were faster, everybody went with it. Everybody fell for it. Everybody started saying, well, I could just shoot them an email. I'll shoot them a this, and I'll shoot them a that. And most people will hear this video who are dead asleep, who are sheeple. They'll hear this and they'll say that I'm absolutely out of my mind because they don't see it yet. They don't get it yet. Democrat, Republican, gay, straight, black, white, don't matter. This is a system of total control. It's a control grid that they're building out, all through electronics and eventually through your own body, which again, the internet of bodies and the electronics being a part of you is a part of this. But most people don't see it yet. So what we're seeing right now is Democrats are upset about all these government institutions getting torn down, right? It's amazing how the seesaw, like I always call it the seesaw, how it's flipped, right? Now we see all these American quote unquote institutions getting torn down. The conservatives love it. And now the conservatives are on board with, hey, let's just transition into technology. Because all they need to hear is the simplest thing. We'll send you money back, right? They don't remember that about 4 years ago, this same government was sending people gift cards, lap dances, all you could eat buffets, free hot dogs, free Arby's cards, $100 gift cards from Visa if they poison themselves, right? And I talked about it then. And I said, whenever the government is giving you something, you better be suspicious about it because they don't give you anything for free, right? But they were giving it for free then. And in fact, they were giving it for free. They were so angry that people wouldn't take their free gift. And now to get your compliance to allow them to dismantle the government, they're going to offer you money back. Instead of you saying, you know what? I'm just not going to pay my taxes anymore. I'm not going to pay my taxes. I'm not going to conform to this. I'm not going to consent to be governed by this. No. See, instead of doing that, what people are doing is they're just hearing that they're going to get money back. And they're seeing unhinged liberals get angry about the post office and get angry about the USAID and how, oh my goodness, we're not going to have Sesame Street in Iraq. And that's basic level thinking that they keep everybody at. Thinking about nonsense, making them think that their enemy is their neighbor, that their enemy is the person who votes differently than them. When in fact, our enemy is a small group of people who have hijacked our government and are using mass weapons of mind control to convince you otherwise, to convince you that you're free, to convince you that your vote counts, and to convince you that, well, not only does your vote count, but the person who voted opposite of you is responsible for all the oppression that you're actually feeling. This is mass hypnosis on a mass scale. So MAGA doesn't see how getting everything digital is going to give the government total control. They're thrilled about it because all they hear is that we're cutting expenses and we're going to get money back and our taxes are going to go down. They don't think for a second about consent to be governed. They don't think for a second about refusing to pay, right? Imagine the whole country refused to pay their taxes. They're going to throw all of us in jail? Well, of course not. But that's crazy thinking. That is the type of thinking that's dangerous thinking, right? Well, if the government doesn't work for you and the government isn't held accountable for your tax money, right? Why would you pay for it? You think that the stuff they're reporting on the news is where your tax money really goes? You think it's going to Sesame Street in Iraq? Think again. It's going underneath our feet. There's underground cities. There's an underground country underneath us that they've built out over the last 50 years. And that's where they're headed while they burn the surface up here. That's why they're sucking the carbon out of the air with carbon vacuums and putting it underground. They're farming down below. They're planning to go down below while they cause chaos on the surface. But one of the big pegs in all these things, when we talk about digital currency, right? One of the big pegs that needs to be knocked down is communication. Everything has to be electronic. All communications have to be electronic. And you could hear this and say, well, that's a stretch. Is it? Read between the lines with what I said. You might not be visualizing it yet. You might think it's crazy because you're still going to get your mail tomorrow. You're likely going to get your mail next year, right? But once they start limiting how many days a week you get your mail and you get conditioned into that, the next wave will be, well, you live in what county? Well, we don't deliver to that county. You live in what state? We don't deliver to that state. See, we're only delivering to these nice 15-minute cities where the mailman could go down the road and we could pretend like it's a utopia, but it's really a dystopia. And the mailman could wave to you and smile like, they're living in the Truman Show and everybody's completely fake and living in hell on earth without realizing it. And you can wave at the mailman and get your letter, and your letter's coming from the guy up the road, and there's nothing for the government to worry about because you're all under full-on surveillance anyway. So then you can get your little snail mail to one another. But this is about the overall removal of communications. When the government decides who can and cannot get mail, when they decide, well, these are the areas we're going to go and these are the ones we're not, and it's all based on pricing, that's how they get people to fall for it. It's all based on pricing, right? It's too much money to send it to, the middle of nowhere, Montana, or it's too much money to send it to Arkansas. It's costing too much money. There's not enough people there for the post office people to go. And we're going to fire all the employees anyway, right? Right. once that goes and full-on communications is all done digitally, along with full-on banking is done digitally, and full-on buying and selling is done digitally, then it's over. And that's what we're headed towards. And people don't see it yet. And I know people will see this and say, whoa, that's a jump. I'm on the jump to conclusions map, right? Is that from Office Space? Right? You're jumping to conclusions here. Not jumping to conclusions at all. Every single thing that Trump dismantles with Elon Musk, we have to look at. Because every single thing that comes down is being replaced by AI governance infrastructure. So we can look at the mail and we could say, well, I mean, how often do you, Mr. Cole, how often do you get a letter in the mail? I mean, I don't get mail that often. Once we allow the entire system to go, then it's full on control. Full on control. And they're doing this in the name of, again, well, it's an institution losing money. Don't you want your tax money back? And all these suckers cheer for it. And they don't even realize that the guy who is leading them, or the guy who's standing next to Donald Trump leading them, Elon Musk, is the same guy who wants a Neuralink embedded in your body. Mark of the Beast, anyone? The same guy who's saying the phone will be obsolete by 2030. The same guy who's setting up Starlink all above us, like Skynet, right? And none of these people see that we're giving up all control of our lives to this AI governance infrastructure. And that's what we're headed towards, ladies and gentlemen. I thank everybody for being here. I hope you're all doing well. God bless you and your families, as always.